Welcome to Integrative Lawyers of the World. I'm your host, Carrie Raleigh, and joining us today is J. Kim Wright. She is the visionary behind this very podcast, Integrative Lawyers of the World. And with her vision, she has connected with, has worked with, has transformed the way that law can be practiced at the individual level, at the social level, at the community level, at the world level. Her vision is that law and lawyers can be a healing force in the world. She has written books published by the American Bar Association. She has worked with governments. She has worked with lawyers from around the world. She's a coach to lawyers. She works with clients. She is here today to talk to us about integrative law. And so with that, welcome to our podcast today. Hi, Kim. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to be here, Carrie. Thank you for hosting this.
It's very good to have you here. And I just want to say we have finished series 1 of the podcast, and you're kind of going to be bringing us in together to series 2. Just as a starter, for anyone who has not listened to series 1, please check it out. We have interviewed some great lawyers, and as a host, I have had such an amazing experience interviewing these individuals that each one of them has inspired me in so many ways. So I want to thank you for putting this together. And with that, so let's start with, we're talking about integrative law, integrative lawyers in this podcast. What is your vision for integrative law?
It's a big question. So, integrative law integrates a lot of things, and we've actually, as a community, been having conversations about what it is, and I wrote about it, and kind of identified some pillars and some values, and it's talking around something, and it I think that what I really think is it's integrating the whole person, the whole system, and and how we are together. Like, law can be about relationships, but that's not how we're trained. We're not trained to be the healers of relationships, which is years ago I heard this. I don't know what the original source is, but that ministers heal the soul, doctors heal the body, and lawyers heal relationships. And so we're not trained that way. Nowhere in law school did they ever teach me how human dynamics work and how to resolve a conflict. No, they taught me rules for how to make a case, and how to go to a third person. Even when I took mediation courses, they really were about the process and not the people. And so integrative law, I think, is about the people and a holistic view of who we are in a system.
I like that. And it makes sense, is that first, when you're saying it's about integrating people, integrating the systems, integrating our connection process, there's 3 different elements to it, which I want to talk about each one of those elements, but I almost want to start at the ending first, because because people are part of the system, you need to have people who are integrated within themselves so that their part of the system is coming into the system in a healthy way to have a healthy effect. Kind of like, I don't know if this is the right way to word this. What is the computer programming principle, garbage in, garbage out? And I don't mean to refer to anyone as garbage in any way. That's probably anti-integrative law principle. But I'm saying, if we all have our baggage, our perceptions, our baggage, and if we're not dealing with that or aware of that, we're bringing that with us when we interact with the system.
Yeah, I see it. It's like it's nested levels. So like the center circle is about ourselves. And there are people who make their whole careers, lawyers and non-lawyers alike, about like personal growth and development and consciousness and all of that. Very valuable work. I don't want to take anything away from it. The next level is about relationships. It's about creating businesses. It's about creating relationships among people. It's a divorce comes in there, like so we go from that personal to the more relational, and their whole careers built on just that level. But then there's another level which is about with groups of people, so organizational development and and how do we get the work done together and family dynamics and like each level is more complex on a systemic scale. So then after the organizational level, there's sort of like a community level, that's, like how do we live together as many organizations and many relationships and many individuals. And then it can go out, you can call it society or culture, and then, the world. And every one of those levels has somebody working, or many, many, many people working at that level. But if you're working at the world level, you actually are working on all of the levels at the same time because they're inside the circle. And so it becomes very, very complex. And how do we integrate who we are and all of this complexity into a system that works for everybody? And so that I see integrative law as inquiring into that. If we're about relationships, then doing our own work is core, no matter what else we're doing, and then how we're acting in relationships is also really a basic. Like if I can be completely enlightened, but if I can't have a conversation on the phone with a technical support person without screaming, I've got some work to do. Which, by the way, is one of my bugaboos.
It's mine as well, because you think you have this when you have done this work yourself. And like you said, if you are on your own in yourself, it's very, maybe not easy, but you can embody the principles of being enlightened. And then next thing you know, you're in a conversation with someone and you can just all those principles go out of the way. And you and I had talked about this in the past before, how we'll start bringing in the lawyer card into these conversations, even with the experience that we have. So how do you, I guess, what is your comment or suggestion to the individual who's goes through these experiences like we do? We know what it's like to be mindful, but something trips us up.
But the word practice comes to mind. We have law practices. Some people practice mindfulness, and that word has a lot of different usages. And I think that's part of the integrative law movement. It's like being reflective and considering like that my part in the system, my attitude, my knowledge, my triggers, like all of those. And if we are working on that for ourselves, then we are able to do that in a relationship with a client or to help the client in their relationships. And so that's one of the ways I see lawyers can be so transformative, because it continues to grow out in that circle. And every piece of it is important. So whether we're doing our own work in the privacy of our home or office, that's still work that can't help but get into the rest of the world. But then when we take it out and we're very conscious about how we're doing that, and we're doing it in relationships, and we're creating businesses that are conscious, and we're all of those levels, then that's an integration of our humanity, our consciousness, and the system all at once. And that's for me the reason decided to work with lawyers in my work because I really want to, I'm one of those, I want to save the world people. And, and the way you do that is that you start with working with yourself. So, I've done a lot of work on myself. And that leads to being able to work with other people because I can see myself.
Yeah. And you can move into the outer layers more equipped or better equipped when you have worked on that inner self at the core. Like,
yeah. You can't save the world unless you've worked on yourself.
Yeah.
Like all of those other levels are part of that image. Which, by the way, I've seen that image now several times in other places, but I think I invented it. I felt it, and many years ago, I felt like, oh, my work can. It's the puddle, like dropping the stone in the puddle. It goes out, but that without that stone, which is the middle, you don't get the outer edges.
One common thing that came up with the different guests was when I asked them about integrative law, they talked about this too, but they also all talked about a part where they said, I came to a point in my career where I felt like I had to be someone else at work, someone else as a lawyer than I was at home. And it got tiring having to put on those different faces in the different parts of my life. And so I wanted to integrate all of me in all that I am doing. So the part of me that loves meditating and doing yoga can also be a part of me when I am a trial lawyer or a business lawyer. So I know you've worked with some other lawyers about that as well. Is there any other things that you can say to individual lawyers who may be feeling that?
I'm both lucky and challenged in that I didn't have the experience of practicing law in the old way because I never bifurcated myself that way because I just decided if I had to be that way, I wasn't going to practice until I found a role model who actually showed me it was possible. And then once I saw it was possible, every other challenge was just something to overcome.
Yeah.
Like before that, I felt like, oh, I can't do this. Like I cannot be a jerk the way I saw lawyers being a jerk. It wasn't in my like I can fight. I'm good at that. But when I did trial work even as a holistic lawyer, and I was really good at it. And my clients won, and all of that. I was good at it in a lot of different ways. But I was good at it, but I was always in my integrity. Integrity is like balance. It's like riding a bicycle. Sometimes, you lean over here and you think, oh, I'm outside of where I need to be. And you go back. So I'm not going to say I was always straight on, but I knew that once I saw the vision was possible, that was where I was going. And if I leaned one way and then the other, I was still like on the bicycle going forward. And so I never bifurcated myself in the way that a lot of people say they did. But I've heard that as a very common story.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is about me that one of the things I talk about, Don Williams, Stella Rabout's husband, was in a workshop with me, and Stella was a great leader in the idea of law being a healing profession in the early days. And he talked about it like chiropractic, that when you are in integrity, you stand taller.
Yeah.
And when you stand taller, you can see further.
Mm,
and that like your whole body is healthier.
yeah.
And when something is out, then it starts impacting the whole system, and when your focus becomes on the pain and not on what you can see. And that story um, uh, kind of explains for me, like, I wasn't willing to be in that kind of pain. And it explains a lot about my life. A lot of the transitions I've made, because the creep of things not being in integrity. I have about a 4-year statute of limitations, that if it gets, if it creeps over, I make a drastic change to get myself back on. I am not somebody who can stay off track very long.
So, but that also, I think, relies on or is based on you having a very clear understanding of who you are. Um, and I think so. You said you've done a lot of work in personal development work. Did you start doing any of that work before law school, after law school? Like, where in your as your profession goes, where in your professional life or experience did you start doing the personal development work?
It was after law school, but before I started practicing law.
Okay.
And so I had rejected the law. And one of the things I like to say is that I rejected the law didn't reject me. Like, I passed 2 bar exams just to show that I could.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, I'm not going to be a lawyer, because I don't want to be a jerk. And I had seen some really awful examples of jerky lawyers, that I didn't, like, if that's what a lawyer is, then I reject that. But when I got the new vision of being a lawyer was after I started doing my personal growth work, and I met somebody who was in that work. And so I did, I did 1,000 hours of landmark education. I've done nonviolent communication. I've done a course called Building Sustainable Relationships. I done a lot of appreciative inquiry and organizational development and spiral dynamics, and on and on and on and on. I became a personal growth and organizational transformation nerd, with as many tools as I could put into my toolbox, and studying systems change and all that kind of stuff, because I wanted to have the tools to live my own life in integrity.
Yeah.
And to be a lawyer in integrity. And then I started finding other people who were sort of on that same path.
And that goes to the importance, you've mentioned this a few times, of finding a role model or a mentor that can show you, or to look out and seek the ones who can show you how it is that you want to be, or the possibility of what you want to be. And I'm repeating this here. You said it a few times, but I'm repeating here in case anyone's listening and say they're at the part of their career where they can be a mentor to someone else, or to be a role model to someone else. They can have that positive impact to someone that your mentor or role model has had on you.
Yeah, well, it was it felt like magic. I was I was living in North Carolina. I went to to a meeting in Atlanta, which was some distance away. He came from Chicago. We both, like, the stars aligned, and everything aligned, so that we were in the same room at the same time. And he stood up and introduced himself, and talked about granting dignity to everybody, and that he was a divorce lawyer who thought that people should be friends. And it was one of those moments where my life really changed out of that one interaction. And so for me, that showed the power. And you're right, there are lots and lots of people out there who can provide that like what they've done in their own work and how they've aligned their lives with who they are, is very powerful. And they may not even know how powerful it is, because it's just how they are. It's, like, it took me a while to figure out that, like, this idea of integrity that Don so brilliantly described,
Yeah.
was was something that I had intuitively felt and had aligned my life with, that I really suffer when I am not in alignment with who I am.
And to have the awareness to see that, and to the awareness to say, oh, this is what's going on here, as opposed to pointing fingers at other things. It's the job, it's this, it's the weather, it's that person or that person, but to actually be able to see that as, oh, wait a second, I'm not really being aligned with myself here. What adjustment can I make, or do I want to make?
The adjustment may be to change the job, or it may be to be different in the job.
Yeah.
Like the circumstances help us see where we are. And if we can sometimes change the circumstances, and sometimes we can just change who we are.
The circumstances can help us see what's going on, who we are. They have a role in what's going on. And then it's sometimes in the variation, or another side of the continuum, is the circumstances are the reason, like blaming the circumstances.
Yeah, right.
Closely related, I guess what I'm saying. And I could see it being easy for someone to get caught up in blaming the circumstances. I probably have done that in my life at some point, as opposed to kind of seeing the circumstances as clues to what it is you want yourself to, or what it is for you. And then I like what you said. Sometimes it does mean that you change the circumstances, or you change your way within the circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're living in a rainy climate, sometimes you're going to get wet. And there are things you can do about that. You can get an umbrella. You can get a raincoat. You can move to a desert. There are lots of possibilities. It will still be raining there.
Yeah.
But you have the power to make things different for you.
And so that goes all of what we've been talking about, is that inner level of being integrated within yourself.
Yeah.
And then you talked about the vision and the other processes. Before we go on to discussing how you are living your vision for being an integrative lawyer, is there anything else you want to talk about these things, these different levels?
One of the things I want to say is there's not a judgment about being anywhere in those different levels. That they're all necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to recognize that if you are working at an organizational level, then you must also be working at a relational and personal level. And if you're not doing your own work, then you're not being as effective as you could be at that organizational level. And to look at it from a relational level, there are a lot of mediators out there who actually hate conflict, and they haven't come to terms with their own relationship with conflict, and yet they're trying to help other people with their conflicts, and they're often judging them for having conflict. And I think that's an example of going back and doing like that other level of work, their personal work, to get okay with conflict, rather than having, like conflict can be an opportunity for transformation. And if you're making conflict wrong, then your clients are going to be thinking that something's wrong, that they are in conflict, rather than they're just being human beings. And so at every level, those conversations of how do you go to the, how do you incorporate, how do you integrate all of those previous levels? And some people want to go really, really deep into just the personal reflection, contemplative kind of practice. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we actually learn at all of the other levels, learn from people who do that work.
Yeah.
And they help shape our work to do it at the other levels. And so, I treasure the people who decide to go very deep at each level and then bring to the system that knowledge. Because, a lot of mediators think that they want, like, their dream is to work in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Like, if they could resolve that, then their lives would be, complete. But if that is your project, there's a lot of work you must do to own your own anger and despair and all of that kind of stuff before you can be effective there.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like where is your passion? Like, pick the level of your passion and then work there. And if you want, then after you feel like you've kind of mastered that level, if you want to go to another level, you can. But any one of those levels can be an never-ending opportunity for growth and learning.
I think that just answered the question that I was going to ask. I was going to ask I'm just asking it, if someone thinks, look, I'm just a lawyer working in a firm, working with business clients, how does all this integrative law stuff apply to me?
Gosh, so many ways. So first of all, if you're working with businesses, you are working with an organization.
Yeah.
And so immediately that frame is you have the individuals involved and their consciousness impacts, like you can, the business cannot be any more conscious than the people who are leading the conscious. The business cannot be any more conscious than the people who are leading the business.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are part of that system as an advisor or a litigator or whatever, then you can bring your consciousness there and actually help to shape those conversations. One of the ways I do that in working with businesses is I do conscious contracts. And the conscious contracts model involves having a lot of different conversations that come from that center place, that the personal growth place of, why are you doing this? What is your vision for the world? Why are you actually doing this business with these people? What were the intentions that you started out with? What was the world you wanted to create here? And that is a different conversation than who's to blame.
Are these conversations in the conscious contracting, is it with your client, but then is it sometimes having conversations with the other side, the other party of the contract together? Maybe with their lawyer, to everyone bring together, what is your vision for this transaction, this business?
Yeah. And I've done this with people who are already in conflict to back it up. And, like, why did you do this in the first place? Because people would, like, when things go off track, it's like they're heartbroken. Like, people have told me that they went into corporate law because they thought that it was a way to get away from emotions, and how mistaken they were. because anytime you have people, you have the whole package of who people are. But when you start a business, that's a very sacred kind of, that's like having a child, and you have a lot of thoughts and you have a lot of feelings about it. And when somebody tries to attack that, or is not doing it the way you envision, then there's a conflict there. And so part of what I do with businesses in the process is have that, who are you and why did you come together in the first place conversation that reminds them and grounds them back in that. And then we can look to see, like, either from the perspective, where could this go wrong? Like, who are you when you are under stress? Who are you when you have a conflict? Let's talk about that so that we can build that into the contract? Or where did things go off for you? Where did they leave the track for you? How has that impacted you? And sometimes there are people who are just manipulative in it and mean and all that, and things go that way. The understanding the what happened actually gives them, like, it puts them back in the driver's seat about what do I do next.
Okay.
And so that's, for me, that, that's a great question, because that organizational level is very complex, but it's still human. All of those human pieces are there. They're just more puzzle pieces.
And when we're talking, one last piece to this, the different levels and how there needs to be integrated together. My husband and I were talking the other day how, with all the climate change goals and the country setting goals to reduce fossil use and our carbon footprint by a certain time frame, that you think that would be a good thing, and that our carbon footprint is going down. And in the long run, it probably will. But I guess in the short run, a lot of the fossil fuel companies are like speeding up their process, trying to get the most out of the earth that they can right now, so that it's really increasing our levels in the short run, in the short term, which hopefully we can reverse or not. But why I'm reminded of this during this conversation is, in the conversation with my husband, I'm like, who are the decision makers in that company that says, let's extract as much as we can right now at all costs, so that we can make as much profits as we can right now without regard to the rest of humanity? Who is that decision maker? And if that someone's on that team, right, who are doing that, if those people were integrated at all the different levels that we're talking about, I just wonder, would they be making the same decisions?
I think that's a really good question. And that another piece of the integrative law movement is really about values and purpose and our missions on the earth, and from that bigger perspective, that's not just about me, but at the global level. And I have a hard time imagining that somebody could have gone through that process of envisioning the world they wanted to see and only measure it in terms of how much money they're going to make today.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be, maybe that value that's feeding that is some value around security, and that they tie money to it. But having the conversation about what needs they're trying to fulfill might be a place to actually start impacting that.
Yeah.
So that one of the pieces of the integrative law movement are the people who are working at that societal/world level, who are really looking at these questions about the environment and our connection, and they are such a great example, because they're looking at who we are as interconnected beings, which is a very center-based conversation, and it hits all the levels. Who we are as a interconnected planet, and how we impact each other is a very complex conversation, that if you haven't done that inner work, can go off the rails pretty quickly.
It can go awry quickly. Yeah, because when you were saying maybe the value is of having security, I was talking to someone once about, I wanted to create an affirmation about I'm bringing security into my life. And she had just said, and I think I worded something that simple, like I value security. And she suggested I reword it, because she's like, underlying that value of wanting security is a belief that fear can be closely linked to that need for security, is linked to a fear that you don't have it or you can't have it. And so I just point that out because when someone's having that value, it goes back into having the mindfulness and the awareness at that deep level to see the interconnections of the different feelings and the different values of what you say you want may actually be undermining it and be undermined by the feeling that you don't want.
Yes. Like, like, imagine that conversation at the oil company if these integrative principles of, how, what needs are we trying to meet here?
Yeah.
What is the vision of the world we're trying to create? Like just having those conversations, how that would shift things.
Yeah.
There's a conversation I'm aware of. So a friend of mine who is a consultant to a lot of big companies he was talking to the CEOs of a whole bunch of companies. And like from the perspective of being in the company, these are the most powerful ones. They are the ones who set the vision that, they are the ones who, really control what the company does. And in that consulting circle, they actually expressed that they were afraid not to do things the way they had always been done. And that and that they would be judged by their peers as being too reckless or risky or whatever. And so the things they really thought and were really focused on, like the things they valued were things that they weren't living, but they thought that they had to.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, like knowing about that conversation, like how many people who are in the oil companies actually want something different, but the conversation's not being encouraged. And they're all just going along on the same path because this is how things are done here.
Wow. It also shows the need for integrative lawyers, integrated leaders into all systems, into systems or places like that to shift a culture so that new ways are welcomed or considered. Because we're at a time, like one of the things that when you talk about integrative law movement, you say to transform law into a new practice of law, because it's not just a new practice of law, we're at a point in our world where we do need new ways of doing things. We can't be reckless with it and coming up with the new ways, but we definitely do need new ways, and that can be scary.
Yeah. Well, but sometimes it could be something as simple as asking a question. Like, like just being aware enough and conscious enough to ask the right question at the right time.
That's what I'm asking for right now as I'm interviewing you. No, but if you were in that conference of high-powered CEOs and the consultants to them, and everyone's just saying the same lip service, same ideas and same visions that's been going on for the last 10 years, what question would you ask the group, or would it be something you ask people one-on-one?
I think the question could be different depending on the context, but it could be like, what is the world you want to live in, or that you want to leave for your children, and how can we be part of creating that? It could be something like one of my favorite questions is, what do you love about your life?
Mm.
And there are people who can't answer that question because they don't love their lives. And that is that's a point. But when they start looking at what they love about their lives, they pretty much aren't talking about extracting all the oil from the Arctic Circle. They're looking at relationships or a challenge or something that helps to center them back in that internal place. And then from there, who are we going to be and how are we going to create that?
Yeah.
More of that. So, those are two examples. There are probably 1,000 questions that could actually turn things in a different direction.
One thing that we are seeing, which I think I want as a promising sign, I mentioned that as something that's room for improvement. But on the other side, where the certified B corporations, and you're starting to see more companies becoming a certified B corporation, which my understanding of that is one of the things of those companies is they have an integrated approach. How is my business going to, one, affect my employees, my consumers, and my community that I live in and the world at large? And they have to go through that process in order to be a certified B company. So that is, to me, it's an example of where integrative principles are coming into play in that one of the outer levels that you were talking about.
Well, and I had to write down that I think we should interview John Montgomery at some point, because John Montgomery is one of the leaders around the B Corporation, and he's one of the most conscious people I know, a conscious leader, and I think that's part of what the change is that's going on in the world. It's like the old world wasn't as connected. It wasn't as complex. It wasn't as connected. And now we're having to deal with the complexity and the interconnectedness. And that raises our awareness as well as our duty. Because once we see the impact we're making, then we want to reflect that in the decisions we make. And that, I think, is where B corporations come in.
I want to repeat a quote from you. The last time we were talking, you had mentioned something to me. I think this goes again to the different levels. And then, which you said, and I wrote it down so quickly that I'm not sure if I got it 100% correct, but it just sounded very wise. So I wanted to repeat it to you today. We can't change people or make people change their consciousness, but we can create systems that foster or facilitate dialogue, that for dialogue to occur in a more conscious way.
Oh, I whoever said that was pretty cool. So, as lawyers, we often think we're going to make things happen. We're going to force someone to do something. And the legal system really encourages that. We're going to make them stop. We're going to make them perform, whatever. They're going to be better because we make them better. And that doesn't work. I mean, and I can show research on all the different practice areas. In the restorative justice movement, they've done a lot of research on restitution. So when somebody goes through a court system and they have a fine in order to have restitution, then I'm not going to get it exact, but it seems to me that it's like 20% of people actually pay it. It's a really low number. But if they go through a restorative process and they actually connect with the person and they make a promise that it comes from them, then something like 80% of it is paid. Now, the circumstances are no different for those two groups, except for the one factor of actually the promise.
Coming from the individual as opposed to you have to do this.
And so being accountable and being held accountable are two different things. And so the court can tell you must do something, but it's sort of like when I've told my children when they were young, you must apologize to your sister. Like the words might come out, but the behavior hasn't changed. And so there's that that sense of like, it's a fiction that we can control anybody, but we can actually allow people to show up as their generous and heroic selves. Like, the questions we were talking about earlier, like, if you ask a question like that, that's creating a system where something else can show up, something that's not the norm, that expected. And so we can design a system where there's more of that conversation happening. There's more of that conversation that's calling back to who are you and what's really important to you.
Yeah.
And giving people spaces to be able to say that and to express that in their actions. And so I think that's what I meant with that quote.
I think it's a very good, insightful thing. All right. So I'm mindful of our time. And I also want to talk into two more things, but I think they're related to each other. One is you had shared with me in the past some of the miraculous ways in which the integrative law, or your vision for it, has unfolded. And I also want to talk about how you are living and things that you are working on as part of your integrative law experience. I have a feeling there's some overlap between those two areas, so I'm just going to raise it up and give it to you.
I'll talk about the first. You might have to connect the second. So this is when I started out. So for those who don't know, in 2008, I gave up my house and I gave up my law practice and I began traveling to find integrative lawyers. And the idea I had was that maybe there were 100 of us at the time. In my experience of going to conferences, I was seeing some of the same people and all of that. I was soon enlightened that that was not the case. There were a lot more people than I thought there were. But I started traveling, and I traveled around the U.S. and then I wrote the first book and got invited to overseas. And so I've been around the world a dozen times or so, gone to a lot of different places and met a lot of lawyers. And when I started, I wouldn't say that I was much of a spiritual person, but the being on my path has brought spirituality to me in a very personal way, a very lived way. So things that are completely illogical have happened to me many, many times. So I was at the airport on my way to London, for one example, and I'm checking my email in the airport, and I get an email from somebody who has found an article that I wrote 10 years before. And she writes to me that she thinks that she's alone, that she's a barrister in London, and that she's really interested in things like emotional intelligence. Hi, Maureen, if you're listening. Emotional intelligence and things like that, but she doesn't know anybody else like that. And so here I am in the airport writing her, would you like to have tea on Thursday?
Nice.
Like, I mean, of the whole world, she in London, it was like she felt me coming.
Yeah.
I was in the airport in South Africa on my way to India when I got an email on LinkedIn, I think we should know each other. And I met Rajesh 3 days later in Delhi. He didn't live in Delhi, but he was there he'd come from the north to visit his family in Delhi.
Wow, while you were there.
During the time I was there. I have, on every continent, I have a story like that. Driving into Boise, Idaho, like seeing the Welcome to Boise sign and having my phone ring. And Boise, Idaho was not a place that I would expect to have found anybody. I was just, visiting a friend. And so that kind of magic, to me, helps me to feel like I'm really on the right path. And when magic is happening, I take that as a breadcrumb to it's the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And so I have this sense of like this net of connections around the world, and that going to a place will help me connect with the people who are connected to the place. So the first thing, so I'm a person who's been nomadic, and yet the first thing I want to know from people is, where are you from?
Mm.
That's the first. I've noticed this in social situations. Where are you from?
Yeah.
And I I want to know who their people are. I want to know about the place, because I have that sense of connection to the people in place that then connects me to all the people that they need to know that I need to connect them with.
Okay.
So that's my magic. And it still happens when I'm stationary. But it doesn't seem as magical when I get an email from somebody when I'm sitting still.
But still, the
And
timing of when you get the email, though, may come into, there could be magic in the timing that you get this.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, lately there's some people who are in very high positions of we call it authority and leadership, who have found us lately, that is starting to tell me that we must be hitting a new level as a movement. And I guess that kind of goes into my vision. So I spent a lot of time just traveling and meeting people. When I started traveling, it wasn't about creating a network. It was about finding people who thought they were alone and letting them know they belong to something. That these people who are in their own communities, just considered weird lawyers, are actually pioneers of something that's unfolding, that's different from the way we were trained in law school in the past. I teach at a law school now, so I have to say in the past, because it's now being taught in law schools and more around the country, around the world. But in the way that most of us were trained, there what I'm talking about is really strange, and really like I haven't said once anything about case law. I haven't talked about strategies for litigation. All of the kinds of things that we were taught were important and that lawyers still hold as important. What I'm talking about is so different from that. It's not even just innovation, because there's a lot of innovation around technology.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm talking about is human technology, not computers. I love computers. I use them all the time. Early adopter on everything technical. But what I'm talking about is really the human factor and our ability to make changes through connection. But when I began my journey, I just wanted to find those people. I wanted them to know they weren't alone. And I got a lot of satisfaction and inspiration. Like when things are really bad in the world, I get inspiration from knowing these amazing things that are going on. And so I went out and I interviewed people, put it out on YouTube back in the early days of video, and started sharing their stories because I wanted other people to be inspired and to see that things could be different. Not only was I interested in being a role model, but I was wanting to provide lots and lots of role models for lots and lots of different people. And so that was the first decade or so of my work. I wrote the books so that people could see that there was this.
Can we name the books?
So my first book was Lawyers as Peacemakers, Practicing Holistic Problem-Solving Law. And the ABA came to me and asked me to write that book, and it came out in 2010. And that's really where I went from being the weirdest lawyer in the world to being mainstream. Look at that, and I was named a legal rebel, which is what the ABA calls their visionaries, in 2009, and the book came out a few months later. And so, and then the other book came a few years later. Again, the ABA came to me and said, "Isn't it time for a second book?" And I said yes. And I wrote "Lawyers as Changemakers: The Global Integrative Law Movement." So that's where I really saw that it was much bigger than I originally thought, and that it's actually like a shift in consciousness that's going on. That it first shows up usually like one or two people in a town, or if somebody thinks they've gone mad because they're so out of the same ideas as their peers, and so they think that they're weird or mad, or somehow they don't belong in the law, and many of them leave the law as a result. So I went collecting those people to let them know that they were not alone, that they belonged to something, that they were pioneers. And one of the things I discovered was that community really does give us courage. And knowing that we were part of something actually meant people were more flamboyant, and that they were willing to come out. And then it gave room for other people to come out,
yeah,
and become more and more visible as integrative lawyers. And so we're at a new point now of like more people are willing to be integrative lawyers. The ABA books are about integrative law. The people are willing to be conscious contracts practitioners. I'm training. I think we've got 16 languages now that people speak that are doing conscious contracts. I just made a list of them and asked people in the community what languages they spoke, and I was really like kind of blown away. And so we have all of these things happening, and it's no longer the weirdest thing. It's like we're moving towards a new normal.
yeah,
and while that was going on in the integrative law movement, we had the pandemic. Now, before the pandemic, there was a lot of resistance to change, and especially among lawyers, because in the common law countries, law is supposed to be the stability that precedent is everything. If it hasn't happened in the past, it can't happen in the future, and so that mentality in law actually keeps people from taking very much risk and changing. And so one of the things that was going on in the law was like this whole idea of an online court, and that was considered the weirdest thing. Like that was weirder than I was. And then we had the pandemic, and we went from all court being in person, and a month later, all court was online. And so there was like this drastic change that people had to adjust to. And then they were no longer in their offices; they were in their homes. And when they were in their homes, other people came into their homes because they came into the Zoom. And so that facade, that separation of having one life at home and one life at the office, that got broken down. And we all saw news shows where the 2-year-old gets up in the middle of the night and comes and sits on the newscaster's lap. I saw that locally. The night shift, the 4:00 in the morning news program, the baby got up and toddled in and got in mommy's lap while she's reporting about the latest car crash. And so so that facade has broken down, and so that there's a new level of authenticity that's been unfolding. And so we have less resistance to change, a new level of authenticity, which really goes to that middle piece. And then and then there's this whole the great resignation that's happening. People no longer want to work at things that aren't meaningful for them, and they're fleeing. Well, if people were fleeing legal careers before, you can only imagine what it's like now. And they say that a lot of people have fled because they finally had a chance to start their own businesses and practices and all of that. But nobody wants to go back to the high rise, get locked in a room with no windows, and work on documents all day.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to do that. They all want to have more meaningful work. So I think that the circumstances have now aligned in such a way that, nobody wants, we all saw people dying and all that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to waste their life anymore. And so integrative law is a movement that has been growing and like building this momentum, that the circumstances, as horrible as they've been, have actually helped us move forward. And so, so my thought now is that we really are at one of those crossroads where we have the possibility for a whole new system. And like when you look at the old system, had baked in racism and sexism and all of that. For me, integrative law also provides some tools for those kinds of conversations. For let's redesign what we're doing as lawyers, so that we have all of these, wonderful values that are more popular now than ever before. Like, I think the old system was built on security and fear and all of that. But what if we build a system on generosity and integrity and authenticity and love, and really taking care of each other? Because that's the other book that I co-authored, co-edited. It's going to come out next year. Is trauma-informed law. And the system,
trauma-informed law.
Trauma-informed law, and I have 3 co-editors. But the idea is that the system has been really designed to ignore or propagate trauma. Like nobody goes to court without some trauma, whether it's a business case or a criminal case. There's this whole complex system. It's based on a dysfunctional system of the drama triangle. And we are taught that our emotions don't matter, but we're human beings who really have to deal with, the vicarious trauma and the trauma that, many people come to law thinking that they're not going to have to deal with emotions and they can avoid their own traumas, or they want to make a difference in some way, that they want to change something that traumatized them. Lots and lots of people become divorce lawyers because their parents were divorced, and they want to, they want to change what happened in their own parents' marriage, and so all of those sorts of things. So, like let's build in this idea that we can actually be compassionate with each other. And what would a legal system look like? That.
And this goes back to your quote from before of how we can design a system to have conversations in a conscious way, and have those conversations about all the different systems that are in place and that we may want to do differently.
Yeah. I've got a story, and I haven't been there. I haven't been to Memphis in a long time, but there's a court there that I'm looking forward to visiting, where the judge, got appointed or elected or whatever, and said, what if we were trauma informed? What if we realized that people who come here are traumatized? And what would we do differently? So they did things like they opened the blinds so that the windows were open. They repainted the walls so that they were.
They redesigned the physical courtroom.
They redesigned the physical courthouse.
Oh.
And they put in like playrooms, because children come to the court. And they train people to be more compassionate, and to realize, like this was a court that involved children. So if somebody's coming in because they think they're going to lose custody of their child, that actually is statistically one of the most traumatic things that can happen to you, is to lose a child. And losing custody is like right up there with the child dying. It's, like a real stressful environment. So if you're coming in and you're, that kind of stressed out, how do people be kind to you? And it, so like one question, like completely, it changed the physical environment, it changed the relational environment. It changed who they were in dealing with people and treating them as individuals rather than just, the next case, the next case, the next case.
That
And I
goes
said,
back with what you were saying before, asking the right question at the right time. And at this one, was it the judge, or asked the
yeah,
question, and it changed the whole system of that courthouse, going back to the council of high executive consultants, having
yeah.
someone there ask the right question. What's the power what's the impact that can have? Here we see the impact of just one question, opening
One
up the way
question.
people can think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine, although what I read didn't say this, I imagine they've had to retrain all of the staff to be more trauma informed, and that has impacted their own personal growth because they've had to face their own traumas.
What do you mean by trauma informed?
Well, we wrote a whole book on it, but I think I think just being the first level is being aware that this is a traumatic event.
Yeah.
If you're a judge and you are seeing 300 people a day come before you, it would be really easy to just like put up the facade and have it not impact you, except that you're a human being. And when you shut off who you are, those 8 hours a day, then it's really hard to put it back on when you leave, and to not be that person. Like, that's why lawyers drink so much. It's why lawyers have addictive personalities around work and substances. There's a lot of disease in the legal profession that's dysfunctional. I think that the core of that is that putting up that facade and pretending to be somebody else other than the compassionate human being. And so if you've got that kind of, they call it the cattle call, and as a person who's actually raised cattle, I'm not even comfortable with that, because I have a relationship with the cattle as well. but that idea that it's just, well, one case after another, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. You shut yourself off. So if you're aware that they're traumatized and you're traumatized, then you can start asking the questions about how can this be more compassionate, take that into account, like that, and that goes back to the therapeutic jurisprudence movement. It's like, how can this have a positive therapeutic impact on people rather than have it just be another opportunity to be injured?
How can it be therapeutic other than just being another opportunity to having someone being injured? Because so much of our system seems like it just continues and furthers injuring people.
Yes. Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you're talking about how, not just in the courtroom and in the legal system, but how systems all around are involving trauma or inciting trauma, feeding on trauma. Any news show, it's all about fear and like trying to rev up someone's sense of that trauma feeling. And imagine what it would be like if we imagine what our news shows would be like if they were coming from a place of compassion and wisdom and being trauma informed, and not being trauma informed so that they can be compassionate and wise, as opposed to trauma instigators.
Yeah. Yeah. And litigation is often trauma instigation.
Oh, yeah.
Like one of the articles in our book was about a personal injury lawyer who talked about, like, he was in the business of trauma. And we had some conversations about it. It's like, if you're in the business of trauma, with people getting better is actually not a good thing. Because if they get better, then then they don't get paid as much money.
That is hard for someone, like when you explain why when firms take on matters on a contingency basis. And when they look on that, that's when they take it on. They're not going to charge any fees unless the plaintiff wins a recovery at trial. So so many people don't quite understand, well, I have this injury. Why isn't any law firm taking it? Well, because that injury, you're trying to place a value on it and how much time the attorney is going to spend on it to do it. They can't do it or they don't do it on a contingency basis because they're not injured enough to get the huge jury award, which that's how the system is set up. And it's not placing any fault on anyone, but it's always struck odd to me that that's how we assess a case. That's how we understand someone's injury by how much money that they can get from the jury. And there's not a point system for the level, but an experienced personal injury lawyer will know, okay, well, can the person still walk? Okay. Can the person versus someone who's been in a wheelchair versus someone who died and it's their estate.
Yeah. And so the really warped thing is that the best case scenario for a personal injury lawyer in that system is somebody on a motorcycle who can no longer walk and may have a head injury, who will never get better, and somebody really wealthy on the other side it was completely at fault.
Yeah.
And that depends on the trauma. It manipulates the trauma. It cashes in on the trauma. So in another case that you think of more as a traumatic case, think about a criminal case where there's a victim who doesn't even have her own power to take the case to court because it's actually the prosecutor's case, and she has no control over what happens to that case, and she just becomes a witness in this manipulation of the facts. And so the system is a dysfunctional design that encourages more trauma, it rewards more trauma, and doesn't take care of the people who are actually hurt.
And this goes back to your different levels from the very beginning, because as we initially set up these systems, people are set up because they're dealing with complex things. There's only so many prosecutors. There's only so many things. You can only try so many cases. It's not necessarily because we don't want to give the witnesses a say, but they're trying to manage that. And who knows where society was. I'm sure someone does. I don't. At the time when these systems were first designed. But we're not at that place now. So going from that integrative level out, how can we redesign them for the needs of humanity now going forward?
And the system was designed it was a lot better than dueling or feudal wars or posses going out and hanging somebody from a tree without a proper trial. I mean, those things, jousting, those were not ideal, and so they created the court system, and different places created different court systems and made different decisions about it. But we've been living with those for 1,000 years, and they were created at times when things were not as complex. And the values were not the same. And so we're moving into an era where we have to take into account that complexity, which means we have to be more flexible, and we have to look for a more solution based kind of system that is compassionate and healing, and takes into account all of the science. If you have to have created an intent and your brain scan says you are incapable of having an intent, how can we try you for murder? If there are all of these things that are now really disruptive in the system, so we just ignore them.
So as we're talking about being flexibility and designing new systems, I know you have a lot of projects going on at different levels, working at different levels of integrative law with different people. Can you share a couple of those projects with us?
Sure. One of the ones I'm really excited about is that there's something happening in South Africa. It's that magical energy. There are people who don't know each other who've been contacting me. And one of the things that has actually happened so far is that I wrote a reader, and there are 7 law schools that are now teaching integrative law in South Africa. And we're in conversation about how to bring more of that.
What is the basic curriculum that for an integrative law course?
In the course, a lot of it is about like vision, mission, and values. And a lot of it is about sort of that, bringing a different kinds of awareness. And then, when I teach it, I teach about sort of the context we're living in now. That this, like we talked a little bit about the benefit corporations. Like corporate America is changing, and we're still treating them like they're the old model. And so, there's this whole conscious business and conscious capitalism and benefit corporations, and there's a lot of change in the area that lawyers would consider their market that we're not aware of.
And is that part of what they're teaching in South Africa?
There's some of that in the reader, so out of this movement and these different ways of thinking have come a lot of models. And so Stu Webb and collaborative law, and the restorative justice model, which is pieces of have come in from a lot of different places, from ancient peacemaking circles and more modern kinds of things. That it's kind of this hybrid way of practicing. I mentioned therapeutic jurisprudence. Therapeutic jurisprudence is looking at, like, is this therapeutic? Is this not therapeutic? How can the law be more therapeutic? These different models, dozens of them, are part of the expression of integrative law. And so, we talk about mindfulness, we talk about reflection and all of that, but lawyers need to see how it's actually being practiced. And so the courses actually go into, like, these are the ways. And I think it's, for me, it's like walking around the elephant. The 6 blind men and the elephant story is like, like some people will see and very clearly understand why collaborative approaches are better in divorce. And some people will see, oh, conscious contracts, that makes sense to me. Some people will see that, doing personal growth work makes a big difference. And, all of these different ideas, by presenting them in a way that we kind of have, like that, you can start to get the big picture by seeing the pieces. So writing about that, writing about, some of the entrepreneurial things about how do you actually be a lawyer? If you're going to do it this way, how do you design your law practice? Like, what is the relationship you have with your staff? How do you charge? Do you bill by the hour, or do you bill on a more per benefit basis, like all of those kinds of things. Like those become questions that have a different context than there's a fuller context than some of the ones I've seen online. It's like, like what's in alignment with me, and how do I take care of myself as part of taking care of others. And then there's some leadership pieces, and what does it mean now to be a leader? Those sorts of things are in that course.
So if there's someone at a law school that is interested in developing a course at their law school, do you have resources that could assist them? Should they contact you?
Oh, sure. I it's one of my projects. So I'm teaching at Quinnipiac, and it's been a year and a half we've been teaching this course, and so we've learned a lot. My co-teacher is Jacqueline Harani, and we have spent a whole lot more time than a typical law school class, because we've been inventing it, and we've been looking at, for example, like how do you bring all of the well-being work that's being done in the legal profession? How do you bring all of the the substantive part, like being able to think like a lawyer and write like a lawyer is still part of being a lawyer. And how do you integrate all of those skills in with all of these more heart-based skills, these essential relational skills? So we've designed that course, and we actually now in December we're going to have a meeting of all the people who want to teach integrative law in law schools, and we've created a model. We're teaching it as a clinical program at Quinnipiac, but we've created a model proposal and an outline of how integrative law could be taught at a law school. We have several people who are approaching law schools now, so it's one of my projects. You were asking about projects. Next year, I expect that we'll be teaching at a dozen law schools.
Oh, excellent. So people there, you have that meeting in December, you have materials. So if someone's at a law school, either as a student or a professor, they can contact you for more information, and they don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. You can roll over to them the wheel that you have so they can drive it. I don't know what the analogy is. I'll probably
They don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have a model of that's adaptable, because like one of the people who I'm hoping is going to teach it is an expert at the neuroscience and well-being piece that I think is an important piece to add, but it wasn't a skill set that I had at that level, and so it's not in my syllabus, but I think it ought to be in hers. And so everybody has their own skill set and expertise that they can bring to this, while also communicating sort of the essence of this is what integrative law is. And the students who've completed this so far are just they're somewhat evangelical around their peers, because they figured out that they actually can practice law in a way that is an integrity for them.
So you have the law school piece, you have conscious contracts. If anyone's interested in conscious contracts, where can they go to get more information on conscious contracts?
ConsciousContracts.com. We have a new course starting every few months, and there's a schedule there. There are certified practitioners listed there if you want to actually explore the model, and then we have many different languages that people can learn about this. And so during the pandemic, I actually kind of revamped the website and started this certification program. And so we've gone through, Alala Linda is my cohort that, we co-created the conscious contracts model, and the two of us certify people and practicing. And then those who want to teach, we have a sort of an apprentice level that they can learn to teach this model. And we've now taught we've now worked with enough that it's currently being taught in Portuguese and Spanish and Italian, and as well as English.
Would this
And
model, would the conscious contract model work well, you think, with in-house legal departments who maybe companies, they're drafting master service agreements with different companies, different clients?
it's a relational model. And so anytime there's a relationship, which a contract is really an expression of a relationship. And so anytime where there's a relationship, that's probably going to be ongoing because there's an investment of time and energy. But even the ones that are sort of the boilerplate can be more conscious. But to have it be a true conscious contract, it involves people getting into the conversation together and discovering what they actually can do together, and whether they're on the same page.
I would
So
think that would be vital for any like master service agreement of any kind, because that implies a long-term relationship with several different projects on an ongoing basis. Yeah. So I'm just thinking of different ways that different people in the different levels can use the integrative law principles.
yeah, we're working with like a lot of the teal movement and a lot of the people who are like interested in generative and regenerative kinds of things. I can't list people's clients, but I'm really excited about some of the projects that are going on around the world where the conscious contract was really the missing piece for them. That they were already trying to be as conscious as possible, and then they bumped up against the old legal system and the old way of writing contracts that was adversarial and fear-based. And then when they found our model, they were able to relax and say, now our project can actually go forward with the vision that we share, actually being part of who we are on our legal documents.
I have two last questions for you, and then you can always add anything you'd like to add. My two questions are, what have you thought after completing series 1 of Integrative Lawyers of the World? And then what are your hopes for series 2?
It was really hard to pick 6 people. We wanted to pick 6 diverse people from different continents, and to represent, like with Gabby in the law, and Amar with sort of a more counseling and a little bit of the trauma and all that kind of stuff, and just some of the people to showcase as a beginning point. But and Carrie knows, we've been like, we keep making lists of people that must be interviewed, and there are not enough hours in the day to interview them all because they're doing such wonderful things. And so I'm excited that we're showcasing these people, and that we'll have this body of work, that people will have those role models. And the next one, right now we have all women from around the world who are also representing different pieces. And so we thought, well, if we sat down and we talked about, well, who will they be? And they're leaders in their own countries. Not to say that the other people weren't, and we don't have a lot more, but we picked 6 for the next series. And so we decided to be fair, that we should pick 6 men next, because this is not only a women's movement. And so the hardest part of this series is figuring out who to interview first, and to try to keep that idea that we have people on 6 continents, all of whom are doing marvelous work. And we want to make sure that we show that this is a global movement, that it's not just in California or Minneapolis or something like that, that these are people who are just like other lawyers, who've had the courage and the support to come out and do things differently.
And with each one, we're building that world community. You're saying there's courage in community, and I think these individuals are courageous in their own way, and through their courage, it's expanding to others who may be listening to this. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited for it. Like I said, each one from series one, they were for each one of them. When I had a conversation with them, it was an interesting conversation, and I would take notes and just pay attention to it. And then I would think it'd be done, right? Okay, yeah, that was a nice, inspiring conversation. And then like a day or two later, I would have an issue going on in my personal or professional life. And something that person had said helped me with that issue. And this happened every single time someone said something in the show helped me like a few days later, just by thinking of what they said. It reset it. It helped. It was just amazing how that happened.
There's so much to learn from every one of them and all of their expressions of how to be an integrative lawyer. They open new possibilities. And, it's one of the ways I said earlier that I can live in the world with, if you watch the news and, and see terrible things happening, I have something that balances that because I have these inspiring people who are working on the world's problems. And I know that we're in safe hands.
I think that's a beautiful place to end this episode. And you are one of those people. So thank you for being that for all of us. Well, very good. Well, Kim, thank you for creating Integrative Lawyers of the World, for bringing me into this, and for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
It's wonderful. Hope you enjoyed Kim's episode, and Series 2 will be starting in January of 2022.